program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University. Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University. Welcome to this Touchstone Beginnings session, Summoning a Supervisory Communication System. This is a big topic, and if ever I'm asked what is a cause of a breakdown in a supervisory system, I have two answers. But let's render them two hypotheses for your consideration today. 1. Students and supervisors have assumptions. And 2. Students and supervisors have assumptions that they're unable to communicate with each other. Assumptions don't kill a doctorate, but assumptions that are not shared, they certainly do. Isn't it amazing that we teach overtly about the importance of communication between students and supervisors, but how rarely do we actually talk about how to improve that relationship, how to actually develop that relationship in the first place? So today, in this Touchstone session, I want to offer 5 ideas for all of us to trial to enhance a student communication system to make this work. And this area has some great and emerging research in it. And I particularly wanted to acknowledge Guzdev et al. For their fine article in the 2020 Journal of Higher Education titled Superhero or Hands-Off Supervisor. They conducted an empirical study of supervisory styles and student satisfaction in Russian universities, and they showed that the hands-off supervisor reported the lowest level of student satisfaction and, interestingly enough, the longest time to degree completion. The superhero supervisors, as you may have guessed, revealed the highest level of student satisfaction, but also the shortest candidatures. And why these supervisors were so good is that they performed the managerial, the expert, and the mentoring functions effectively. Right, so this is a fine piece of work, but this empirical study did not ask why these styles were chosen. Because for every great leader, there must be a great follower. For every great mentor, there must be a great mentee. For every expert, there must be willing listeners who hold the disciplinary literacy to decode it and action that knowledge. So with the focus on great supervisors and dodgy supervisors, or superheroes and the hands-off person, we're actually missing the point. It's not about the supervisor. It's not about the student. It's about the space in between. Because the space in between is where the communication takes place. Communication through much of the last 100 years has been understood as a very, very simple process. Indeed, it used to be called the process school of communication. There is a sender of information, there is a receiver of information. And here we go with the craziness. The receiver receives the information as the sender intended. Yeah, right. So think about Twitter. Think about any text message. The reason why the process school, the process mode or trope of communication was so unbelievably wrong is it assumed that the sender and the receiver shared the same context. So this is wrong. Therefore, the next series of communication theories, many involving semiotics and social semiotics, argued that communication is reliant on understanding the context, that is, the environment in which communication takes place. So today we are really talking about communication and context, and communication in context, bringing them together to create a strong supervisory relationship. Communication skills are really one of those tick-a-box skills, right? In every job application, we talk about generic competencies, transferable skills, communication as the number one skill. But we take all of this for granted, right? What does it even mean? What is communication? There is this assumption that communication is natural, but actually all communication is contextual. All communication is constructed. It requires a speaker or writer in context to connect with a listener or reader in context. If the context, or if you want to go all posh with it, if the literacy is not shared, then communication does not take place. But mostly we all sort of assume that everyone talks like us and everyone agrees with us. But think about how often we have conversations in our own heads. We sort of talk to ourselves. We rehearse endlessly what we should have said. But we need to remember that supervisory relationships are part of a workplace. That is, we're dealing with professional communication. Professional communication, or Profcom, is a long-standing, very well-established field, and there's some fine research in this area emerging in the last few years. And I log a great article by Krista Hoffman-Longtin et al., published in 2021, titled Rethinking Graduate Student Socialisation and Identification. Now, she argues that communication is everything in a doctoral program because it's the foundation of a student's professional identity. We as students, we as supervisors need to focus on communication because we're building up an organisational discourse. Supervisors teach socialisation into academic life through communication. And remember that fine research from Guzdev on the Russian university system that started our Touchstone session today. The superhero supervisors shared their experience of higher education. But the students have to be open to hear and listen to it, and they have to listen to and understand the institutional communication skills being taught. Professional communication requires preparation, so this is why students construct an agenda or a list of questions going into their weekly or fortnightly meetings. Students take notes from those meetings and they send follow-up emails asking questions about concepts or ideas that they didn't understand. So this means that the contexts of the supervisor and student, the knowledge system between the students and the supervisors, provide the context in which the content makes sense. And therefore we must enact iterative strategies to ensure that the contexts continue to conflate and that they overlap. So preparation for communication exchanges is crucial, and feedback and clarity of feedback is crucial. Right, so what we're doing now is we're finding these strategies to connect the context of the supervisor with the context of the student. So what else can we do to enable this communication system? And of course the answer is listening. So much of our culture is based on speaking and preparing to speak, but speaking is not communicating. Communication is actually based on listening. Listening is so important because it builds connections, it builds relationships. Listening also creates the space for the development of interpretations. So listening is not the space before the student can talk again. It is the opportunity to understand the world of someone else. So in other words, by listening, we are enabling ourselves into the worldview of another person. And yes, of course, this does mean that supervisors must really listen to our students. And if we don't understand something that's going on, we must ask the question. Most of the time, communication between students and supervisors is pretty effective in some form. But during a candidature, there will be unbelievably difficult conversations. A student or a student supervisor may be angry or frustrated, and these aren't pleasant dialogues. How to freak someone out is to say, we're about to have a difficult conversation. Always freaks me out that. But if we're dealing with anger or we're dealing with frustration, my first rule is always to let someone have their say. Okay, so if they need to offload, then let them offload. And of course, we need to remember that silence is much more damaging and frightening than anything that anyone could say. Because if someone stays in silence, think about the silent treatment, then they're actually blocking communication and they're not allowing the student or the supervisor to see and share their context. Now, I've participated in many difficult conversations. So I start those, whether I'm dealing with colleagues or whether I'm exploring work with students, I start these difficult conversations with statements like, how can I be of assistance to you today? What would you like me to know? What is a strong resolution for you today? These are tough questions, and certainly I've met my share of students and supervisors who actually don't want any resolution or improvement or outcome. They just want to sit in a grievance, and so that complaint becomes their life's work. They just can't get out of it. And we all know those people who live inside their complaint, and they become the complaint. They become the anger, they become the resentment, and resolutions in that case are just not possible. And that's why we need to nurture our communication systems at the beginning of the candidature, because these communication systems can be destroyed so easily. The key with communication is to be aware of a student's background, be aware of a student's environment, and whatever a student may say or write, the content doesn't matter too much if the student doesn't tailor it for the audience or the context. So I just wanted to finish today's Touchstone with 5 suggestions or strategies for your consideration. Take them for a walk and they may fit. 1, don't assume that a convenient mode of communication for you is convenient for anyone else. Interface management is the first step in effective communication. We cannot assume that the mode of communication that suits us is the mode that will suit our students. Interface management is the first step in effective communication, and therefore we have to ask our student, what is the interface in which you are most comfortable? And then we as supervisors, what's our most comfortable interface? So at the start of the student's candidature, talk about the best modes and platforms for communication and find that interface where both the student and the supervisor can succeed and thrive. 2, don't assume that the quickest mode of communication is the best. We live in an age where convenience is more important than quality and speed is more important than clarity. Don't ever hurry or hasten a communication mode. Don't throw off an angry email. Don't send a text message on the weekend. A student's relationship with a supervisor is part of organisational culture. Therefore, it is part of professional communication. It requires calm, reflexive and considered communication modes. And I have a maxim in my professional life. The more important something is, the more time has to go into the initial communication moment, because that sets the tone for the rest of the conversation. So we need to aim for quality communication and not fast communication. 3, value synchronous communication and recognise how asynchronous communication can enable it. Meetings in real time are important, and students that finish quickly have weekly meetings, full stop. But the research shows that it doesn't matter if the meeting is face-to-face or in an office. That means face-to-face or on Skype or on Zoom. So what actually matters is face-to-face time, digitally analog, and we create as many asynchronous feeders into it as possible. So what that means is make the meeting count. Prepare an agenda where a student shares work with the supervisor and have expectations for the delivery of that written work. And if it helps a student, I always approach with meetings, I go, right, well, I want you to come to every meeting with 5 questions. And those 5 questions are the springboard for the rest of the work they will do in the following week. So for me, those questions provide the springboard for a strong supervisory meeting. So think about 5 questions as the agenda for each week's meeting. 4, formalise a student's communication. Write every email as if a student's boss or mother will read it. Okay. The consequences of Facebook, Twitter and text messaging is we communicate with everybody as if they are our girlfriend or a drug dealer. Make a decision that in student correspondence or correspondence with university colleagues, we formalise our writing. Let me put it in a different way. Every message I write, I assume it will be read in court. Now, when letters and faxes, remember faxes were written, they had a formal quality to them. But because email was and is used for leisure and work, there is a blurring between text messages, Facebook Messenger, Instagram comments and email. So make a decision that all the correspondence you enact, particularly through email, is formalised. Now, Australians have a really bad tendency of CCing half the population of the Northern Territory into every single email. So always look at what the student has written, what you have written. And are you happy for our Vice-Chancellor to read the email that you've just written to that student? Because these days, the chances are the Vice-Chancellor will be reading that email. And we have to realise that the misreading of emails is a site of incredible conflict between students and supervisors. Each year, hundreds of emails are forwarded to me as Dean from students and from supervisors. And so often it's explained to me that that email was a deal breaker, that when I received this email, the supervisory relationship is over. And when I read the actual email, I say, yep, that email is absolutely horrific. Perhaps there were some good intentions there, but again, there was the assumption of the process school of communication that a sender and a receiver will share the same context. Now, I may see the humour in an email as a sender. The receiver may not see that humour. So a student cannot share content if they do not share a context with their supervisor. And 5, don't assume students or supervisors are available for an immediate reply to a message. Here it is. The final difficult truth. We all want supervisors to be superheroes, but Batman has left Gotham City and Superman has been bowed by the kryptonite of COVID. A student's supervisors, like just about every academic in every university now, is tired. Really, really tired. Research shows that the average academic is working about 60 hours a week. They don't get days off, they don't get holidays, families, friends are neglected. So if a colleague or a supervisor or a student hasn't replied, then look, I'm really sorry about that. If an academic, a supervisor hasn't read a draft, I'm really sorry about that. But that is the point about understanding the context to enable communication. Students must ask their supervisor about their timetable. And I think for the supervisors listening to this Touchstone session today, I think we have to share the reality of our timetable with our students. I think we've all tried to protect students from the reality of higher education, and that is no longer possible. What I now do with my PhD students is I share my drafting schedule with them for the week. So all my students know, right, I am reading these 2 drafts and I should be clear on Friday afternoon to read a student's chapter. So if the student is expecting to receive the chapter before Friday afternoon, they're going to be disappointed. So for students and supervisors, we need to talk about the reality of higher education. Talk about a student's week, talk about a supervisor's week. And that reality will allow a stronger communication system to emerge through sharing and reflection on supervisor and student contexts. So at the start of a student's candidature, talk about the best modes of communication. Find an effective interface where both the student and the supervisor can succeed and thrive. So for students and supervisors, let's talk about the reality of higher education. Talk about the student's week. Talk about the supervisor's week. And then understanding that reality will allow a stronger communication system to emerge through sharing and reflection. And thank you so much for sharing your time with me today for this Touchstone Beginnings session. Thank you for listening to Touchstones, our professional development program for graduate studies at Charles Darwin University.